Hello, everybody.
Good morning.
Morning or afternoon.
How's it going?
Going good. You?
Good. Good and good. I'm thinking today's going to be pretty quick. So this will be good. How's everybody coming with their writing?
Come
Anything?
along just fine.
Nothing to report?
Just ironing out some ideas, if anything. Just throwing like stuff on the wall to see what works.
Okay.
Yeah,
Cool.
I'm making a few changes to the idea I submitted. Nothing too big, just some adding some extra characters and whatnot.
Cool. Very good. All right. Well, I'm going to give it one more minute and then I'm going to kick this into gear and we'll be out of here. So I want to reiterate that I really want these Thursday classes to be productive workshops. Last week went very well. Ben Geller offered up his documents to take a look at. And we had a really productive conversation. I don't know if all of you were there last week or not, but I thought it went pretty well and I hope that it was helpful. And so that's kind of, the ideal model for these Thursdays. So if you can be of the mind and maybe establish the habit of having something, it doesn't necessarily have to be what was just issued as an assignment, because I know that like on Tuesday, I'll ask you to do something and you may or may not be ready by Thursday. Um, and that's okay if you have something like from the prior week that you want to put up there. So who was it, Marcus, that was saying you were working things out and kind of spitballing a little bit? I mean, wouldn't it be better to have several people to bounce ideas off of as opposed to trying to work it out all on your own? I mean, advice is advice, you can take it or leave it, but I think it's always nice to have a variety of opinions on something and you can kind of weigh the benefits against the stuff that just doesn't wash in your own mind. Well, this is pretty much the standard turnout, I guess. Okay. I'll do the rest on the fly. So, yeah, let's think about, if we can, um, having things, available that if the opportunity presents itself, that you might be able to workshop on a Thursday, so that I don't sit here, sounding redundant. Um, I've kind of skewed the class. I've weighted it heavily in the beginning for the concepts and the documents and things like that. And the second half of the semester really is about you guys implementing a process. So, what I don't want to do is, burn Thursdays on, being, saying the same things you heard over and over again. I want it to be more about what you guys have going on and see if we can take advantage of our time by giving you a collective forum that's respectful and productive and hopefully helpful in the process of sorting out your projects. We are currently in week 10. So we did first image last week. This week I want you to think about your call to action. um, some of you, it seemed like the call of action just um, sort of casually made its way into the story, and instead of being something that seemed like it was uh, something that would cause your character to really have to make an existential choice. You know, do I deal with this or not? If I do, what is it going to involve? You know, and can I muster the time, the talent, the energy, the money, whatever, to address it, right? It has to be kind of one of those that you really can't turn away from. Taking it or leaving it, inciting incidents, to me, I don't think make compelling stories. I feel like it's almost got to be where, you know, your heroes almost got their back against the wall. It's like, you know, do or die kind of thing. But I want to talk about a specific call to action today, and just kind of show you a little bit about that and what I think about it. And then what I'd like to do for your assignment for due at the end of the week, which is always Sunday at midnight. But um, if, you know, if anybody's ready on Thursday, that's totally cool too. Because I don't want it to be a big complex thing, right? But I'd like to hear what your current call to action or inciting incident is for your final project. Now, you can send me the scene if it's a scene where, you know, the inciting incident occurs. You can write me a treatment that encapsulates just the inciting moment and what it's about, what it means to the character, and so forth, which might actually be, you know, the most compelling document, um, which can also then become a part of your production Bible for either your long running work or your new project for the second half of the semester. So this presents itself as another opportunity to create another document for your Bible. You can add it to what might be your new pitch packet if this is a new assignment. But I'd like to hear what your calls to action or your inciting incidents are, and how they affect your character. Okay. That document, and I don't need more than 1 or 2 pages. You know, 2 pages I think is sufficient. And turn it into me at the end of the week, and I'll take a look at them and see how you're coming along. Okay. Does anybody have any questions about that? No? Is that fairly self-explanatory then?
Yes, sir.
Okay. All right. Cool. I don't want to be vague or nebulous. I put the assignment up on web courses so you can, you know, it's a very simple request. Just tell me what your call to action is currently. And like I said, how it affects your character and how it compels them to engage in your narrative. Okay. As far as the course is coming along, so we are here, week 10. Everything's loaded up and ready to go. There's not much. It's a fairly lean week, because again, I'm hoping that you're focusing on your new writing. So that is, we'll see how that goes. And I'm still working on some of your scripts for grades. So that's my predominant focus this week. But let's move to the presentation, and let me move forward with this. So in terms of the call to action, okay, it's hopefully a dynamic event. It's a dynamic event that's going to draw the reader in, and it's going to be that thing that puts your story in motion, right? So it's the main goal or the main problem. Um, it should coincide with the premise of the story somehow. And it should be something that has to happen in order to, you know, it's the hook. It's going to get your audience interested in hearing the whole story. The story design in 5 parts includes the inciting incident, and it's the first major incident. It's the primary cause that all else follows, right? It's going to put everything into motion, and then it's going to lead us to the remaining stages of story. I don't know who at this point, whose model appeals to you the most. Okay, it could be McKee's, it could be um, Vogel's, it could be the simple, you know, Aristotelian 3-act process. whatever you're using, the inciting incident is going to launch that whole process. Okay. And I want to talk to you in context to this movie. This is a sort of compacted conversation that I had that I was going to do last week if we didn't have a workshop to do. And I sort of consolidated that conversation into a quick presentation. And I want to talk to you in context to the inciting incident as being sort of a rhetorical response to current events, but not current events in our time, current events in another time. Okay. I want to show you how many in this group that are here right now have not seen Apocalypse Now.
I haven't watched it.
I've only seen parts of it.
Parts of it in context to classwork or like YouTube clips that you've looked at on your own?
Both.
Both? Okay. As far as classwork, what was the context of the classwork? Why were you directed to Apocalypse Now?
We were just looking at the opening sequence and the editing and the score used for it, and we just discussed that.
Oh, from a music standpoint, from a soundtrack?
Yes.
Okay. So that's two folks. Does that mean that everybody else has pretty much seen the film?
I haven't seen it.
That's three.
Yeah, I've only seen.
Okay. Okay. Well, I'm going to forge ahead anyway. And for those who have not seen the film, I'm going to play for you the official trailer to the film. Okay. So you can see basically what the story entails. So let me play that for you now.
You've heard of Colonel Walter A. Kurtz? Your mission is to terminate the Colonel's command.
Terminate? Terminate with extreme prejudice.
I love the smell of napalm in the morning.
Very obviously, he has gone insane.
This is the end, my only friend, the end.
Are you an assassin and a soldier?
Okay, so that is the trailer. So a lot of folks have said that this is the greatest war movie of all time. And I think that anybody who looks at it from that point of view is not really acknowledging that there are a number of themes or premises that are not buried very deeply beneath the surface that tend to be moral indictments against war, society, and groupthink, conventional politics, and a lot of things that do exactly the opposite from glorifying war or offering war in a context that tries to comfort us and give us some sense that it's a necessary evil. I think that this movie is the antithesis of all of of all of that. Something that comes out of McKee that I think is poignant here is that he says that in film we use images on screen in conjunction with soundtrack, dialogue, music, and sound effects to reveal our premise to the audience. And it's the confluence of what we see and hear and what people say and do that drives that narrative, right? Subtext then is the under the surface thoughts and feelings, both known and unknown, hidden and discovered by character behavior. Nothing is what it seems. And I think that, nothing could be truer with respect to this film. The interesting thing about Apocalypse Now is that it is a story that is juxtaposed against the narrative of the Vietnam War. And the original work that it is adapted from was written almost 100 years earlier. And the context of the story at that time in the 1880s was not about war at all. It was about the ivory trade in Africa. And so some of the characters who appear in Apocalypse Now are reimagined from the original work, which is called Heart of Darkness. And in that book, the main character is not a soldier. He's a hunter, and he hunts in Africa, and he hunts ivory. And it's about the exploitation of natural resources. It's about the illegality of killing creatures for their ornamental value and not for any other reason. And it's all about waste and abuse. And it's so it's a very interesting novel in terms of social responsibility and accusations of social decadence and waste, and I think that a lot of those themes carry forward to Apocalypse Now, but the difference is the filmmakers were modern filmmakers reimagining a story that was relevant to prior century politics and society, and brought the themes forward and reconstructed them with our current conflict. And at that time in 1972, we're talking about, or no, I'm sorry, 1975, I guess, is when he started the 74, 75. It's a response to the Vietnam War, which was at that moment in US history, a very poignant subject in politics and social commentary. So what happened was the screenwriters, and one of them was adapting, John Milius was adapting the screenplay along with Francis Coppola, with some feedback from Steven Spielberg and George Lucas, believe it or not. They reimagined the script and they said, look, all of these themes are terrific, but nobody in 1975 is concerned with the ivory trade right now. The image of the great white hunter is not an icon in the current vernacular or the current lexicon that anybody is really worried about or talking about. What we are talking about, though, is Vietnam and the loss of life and the expensive war machine and the politics and all of that sort of thing. And so they took the backdrop and they mapped it over contemporary issues. Setting in structure. So no matter how externalized through institutions or internalized through individuals, the political, economic, ideological, biological, and psychological forces of society can shape the events as much as period, landscape, or costume. So I'm asking you some very poignant questions. Does your story focus on the inner, even unconscious conflicts within your characters? Does it raise the level of personal conflict? Does it go higher and wider on battles with institutions in society? Or does it go wider still on struggles against forces of the environment? For the unconscious to share through all the multi-layered experiences of life, your story may be set at one or any combination of these levels. What I'm asking you is, does your story sort of exist beyond the confines of a basic narrative? A simple plot that, is the least interesting aspect of the entire body of work, right? we can use the plot in compelling ways, and we can compare it rhetorically with current events, and we can make statements as authors about a number of things: society, politics, the environment, treatment of individuals, treatment of animals, exploitation of resources. These are the things that I think make our stories interesting and offer a little bit more for the audience to grab a hold of. And when you combine those with compelling performance, good character imagining and good character arc, this is when we get really unique pieces of work, I think. So if we think about the rhetoric of politics and war in Vietnam, and then we compare it to the state of life in the United States in the period of years between 1967 and 1964, these are the prevailing points. The Vietnam statistics were such that the Vietnam War spanned officially from 1964 to 1965 or 1975. Okay. We're in a situation right now where we have two concurrent wars happening globally. One of which we have been in now for, well, both of them we've been in for over 20 years. So there's a lot of parallels between now even and the Vietnam era. Interesting thing about Vietnam is officially the war was from 64 to 75. Unofficially, it's understood now through release of documents, Freedom of Information Act and so forth, and the Pentagon Papers and things of that nature, that we were actually in Vietnam as early as 1950. So 1950 to 1975 is starting to sound a lot like this day and age as well, I think. But there's some important differences. 1 out of every 10 Americans who served in Vietnam was a casualty, and a lot of folks served in Vietnam. 58,000, almost 50, well, 58,150 were killed, 304,000 were wounded, and 2.7 million people served in Vietnam from our own military. Okay. Right now, I think, at its peak, I think we had a little over 1 million service people involved over the past 2 decades in Iraq and Afghanistan. Okay. Basically, less than 1% of the population. Amputations or crippling wounds were 300% higher than they were in World War II. And World War II is a war that's known particularly for its bloody reputation. 75,000 Vietnam veterans were severely disabled. About 7,500 women served in Vietnam, and of that number, 84% of them were nurses or medics of some kind. An additional 11,000 people died in the theater of war that were outside of the war zones themselves, like contractors and private individuals. Of the over 2.5 million people who served, between 1 and 1.6 million of them either fought in combat or provided close support and were regularly exposed to enemy attacks. And in 1995, the Vietnamese released official estimates of the number of people killed during the Vietnam War. As many as 2 million civilians on both sides, and some 1,100,000 North Vietnamese and Viet Cong fighters died. The U.S. military has estimated that between 200,000 and 250,000 South Vietnamese soldiers died. That's a lot of folks. That's a lot of conflict, and it's a lot of conscripts. At home, the war was very unpopular. It was unpopular in some political camps, but it was hugely unpopular amongst academics and amongst the civilian population. The soldiers were on television every evening on the evening news. And I don't know how many of you, if any of you, are from a generation that can remember when we used to have these kinds of things on the evening news. They avoid it now, and they avoid it now because it's not popular to tell the public what's really going on in terms of external conflicts in foreign countries, right? Because there's a lot of money being spent, and they just don't want us to know the extent to which things are happening in these foreign theaters. The initial idea was that the United States was going to go into Vietnam, and they were going to honor a treaty with France, because Vietnam was previously a French colony that they kind of lost control over. And they decided they were going to turn over control to the United States if the United States was willing to go in and insert themselves into a civil war between the North and the South. The North Vietnamese wanted to share culture and politics with the Chinese and the communist ideologies, and the South was very interested in the economics and the access that the West had to offer. And so there was a culture civil war in Vietnam. And it started off in terms of the United States being in a position of consulting and just offering advice about how to wage civil war, like we were the experts. And then it proceeded into secret insertions into Cambodia, secret insertions into Vietnam, a growing number of consultants on the part of the American side, and then ultimately commitment of troops. And the whole time, the image was the destruction and the dissolution of the Vietnamese culture. So the touching point was when Nixon finally started to commit troops to Vietnam officially and start sending men over to Vietnam. So all of this stuff is happening in the cultural sphere, right? In the public sphere, especially in the United States, we had the public and the academics who were outspoken in opposition to the war. And yet we had a political system and we had a corporate system that had vested interests in seeing these war objectives through to their, at that particular time, unforeseen conclusions, but conclusions that they thought they were capable of predicting. In other words, the scuttlebutt at the time was, we'll be in there for a few months. It'll all be over. They don't have the will to resist, and we will extend our hegemony to the Vietnamese peninsula, and democracy will raise yet another flag globally. Corporations will be able to go in and start accessing and exploiting resources. We'll convert another government to democratic from the threat of communism, and we'll gain more support and more consumers worldwide of American goods and culture and whatnot. So that was the rhetoric of the time, right? And so this movie, having readapted, reimagined the screenplay, now presents Colonel Kurtz as an individual who represents the current power elite, the political structure in favor of empire building, right, and extending the reach of American hegemony internationally. But in the process, he has a psychotic break, and he becomes an opponent of all of those points of view, and radically an opponent of those points of view. In response to this soldier's reimagining of his role and new understanding of ethics and moral structure, it's decided that he needs to go. And so the inciting incident in this film is then based on all this this environment of war and rhetoric, is the introduction of Captain Willard, who is a guy who he's kind of a career Army guy, and he's just sort of coasting through his career. He's attained the rank of captain. He is not handling his experience in Vietnam very well. He has questions about, all of the institutions that are at work there, and obligations and objectives and loyalty and all of these things. And he is, because he has experience in counterintelligence, he's brought in and he is exposed to the situation where the Pentagon now has a problem with Colonel Kurtz, and they want to know if Willard can be the solution to their problem. And so this scene, I think, is the inciting incident of the film from Captain Willard's point of view. So let's take a look at this scene. Oh, before I show you that, actually, though, let me give you a quick sample. This is Reuters and UPI footage, some footage from NBC and CBS on actual Vietnam images, set to the tune of one of the classic films of that time, which is often associated with the Vietnam concept, and that is a song by the Rolling Stones called "Gimme Shelter." It's a cover track, though. It's not actually the Stones doing the singing. But check this out for a minute. Okay, so part of the reason why there's so many images of helicopters in this particular newsreel footage is, even though the helicopter made its premiere in the Korean conflict, the third and fourth generations, fifth generations of the helicopter became groundbreaking technology that was exploited in Vietnam for its efficacy. And it was, for the, it was one of the next leaps in, arguably you could call this military achievement, where they could expedite objectives very, very quickly and efficiently with this new machine that they had, this new toy they had to play with. I think it also represented for the first time the detachment of objective from the association that it has with the human component of war. In World War II and arguably in Korea, war represented an interpersonal relationship between enemies. And in order to be successful at war, you had to vanquish one or the other, and you did it in close proximity. And now what we have is a method where quick and expeditious dispatching of an enemy problem can be done with a disconnect, right? From a distance, where you don't have to look this person in the eye. You just sort of deal with them and move on, right? And I think it made it very seductive for a lot of arguments for and against this kind of conflict, saying, it's getting too easy for us to do this. And the interesting thing about what you're going to see about Captain Willard's inciting incident is Colonel Kurtz has embedded himself into the jungle so efficiently, and nobody really knows where this guy is. There's not going to be any quick and expeditious execution of justice. Captain Willard is going to have to go in and confront this man, and it's going to have to become a personal choice. So if we want to talk about the premises that I think are observable in the apocalypse now, it would be that war is an unnatural hell functioning with its own particular insane duality, meaning it's an aspect of our culture that kind of exists for its own sake on the edges of society. It's the thing that we understand and know about, but we don't like to talk about. The ludicrous assumption that war can be civilized simply by instituting rules. To succeed at war, one must become war. That's from Sun Tzu, but that's the gaming principle at work. The burden of war is carried out by the powerless or the disenfranchised members of any society. Okay, one of the accusations and criticisms of the Vietnam War was that it was fought by the poorest and unrepresented in terms of power in the American culture. Okay, and then war is a business. So these are the themes that are lying under the surface, and these are all of the things I think that contribute to not only the first image and the world present in Apocalypse Now, but these are all things that are pointing towards this inevitable situation where we have a captain who is going to be asked by the establishment to execute their concept of a solution to a problem of a warrior with a conflict of conscience. And so rather than society reimagining itself as a peaceful culture, the war culture decides we'll just get rid of the guy who doesn't agree with us anymore. And we'll label him as crazy, right? So here is Captain Willard. We're going to meet Captain Willard, not for the first time. There's a scene prior to this where we see him sort of in an unhinged moment of existential meltdown. He is sobered up by the MPs, and he's brought to this meeting where he's introduced to the real power behind the Vietnamese conflict.
There is no way to tell his story without telling my own. And if his story is really a confession,
Captain Willard reporting, sir.
then so is mine.
Good. Come on in.
Thank you, sir.
Stand at ease.
Captain. No, thank you, sir.
Captain, have you ever seen this gentleman before?
No, sir.
Met the general or myself?
No, sir. Not personally.
You worked a lot on your own, haven't you, Captain?
Yes, sir, I have.
Your report specifies intelligence, counterintelligence with ComSec I-Corps.
I'm not presently disposed to discuss those operations, sir.
Did you not work for the CIA and I-Corps?
No, sir.
Did you not assassinate a government tax collector? Quantry Province, June 18, 1968. Captain?
Sir, I'm unaware of any such activity or operation. Nor would I be disposed to discuss such an operation if it did in fact exist. Sir.
Luke, would you play that tape with the captain, please?
Yes, sir. I'm sorry.
Listen to this carefully, Captain.
October 9, 0430 hours, Sector Peter Victor King.
These are monitored out of Cambodia. This has been verified as Colonel's voice.
I watched a snail crawl along the edge of a straight razor. That's my dream. A nightmare. Crawling, slithering along the edge. Straight razor. And surviving.
Mission 11, received 68, December 30, 0500 hours, Sector King, Zulu King.
But we must kill them. We must incinerate them. Pig after pig. Cow after cow. Village after village. Army after army. And they call me an assassin. What do you call it when the assassins accuse the assassin? They lie. They lie, and we have to be merciful for those who lie. Those nabobs. I hate them. I do hate them.
He joined the Special Forces. After that, his ideas, methods became unsound. Unsound.
Now he's crossed into Cambodia with his mountaineered army of his that worship the man like a god and follow every order, however ridiculous.
Every man has got a breaking point. You and I have them. And very obviously, he has gone insane.
Yes, sir. Very much so, sir. Obviously insane.
Your mission is to proceed up the Nung River in a Navy patrol boat. Pick up Colonel's path at New Mung Ba. Follow it, learn what you can along the way. When you find the Colonel, infiltrate his team by whatever means available and terminate the Colonel's command.
Terminate the Colonel.
He's out there operating without any decent restraint, totally beyond the pale of any acceptable human conduct. and he is still in the field commanding troops.
Terminate with extreme prejudice. You understand, Captain, that this mission does not exist, nor will it ever exist.
Okay. Anybody have any thoughts about that scene just off the top of your head? Just, you know. Anyone?
I was gonna say it's very unsettling, like just the conversation and like hearing over the recordings.
Unsettling.
I think it just builds a great like atmosphere overall for like what Martin Sheen's mission is gonna be, like what he's getting into. Does that make sense?
Okay. Yeah. Anybody else? Anybody else have any feelings about Captain Willard, maybe?
Oh, I was really just gonna say I really liked like the movement in the scene. Like everything felt very like everything felt like it had to happen. Like even with him just like handing the cigarettes and just the way they were moving as they were discussing.
So everybody was sort of shifting in their chair, in other words.
Yes, sir.
And that would be psychologically, what do you think that would be an indication of?
In a way, nervousness in a way.
I think so too. Like we really don't want to talk about this, or we shouldn't have to talk about this, but here it is. And this is a problem. And are you going to be our guy to solve it for us? Because we got Willard, who is a frustrated soldier trying to advance his career, but at the same time trying to not necessarily avoiding risk or harm, but certainly not inviting it in any way. And trying to grapple with, being in a situation like that to begin with. And then they offer him what might seem like a golden opportunity for a climber, right? Somebody who's looking to advance their rank from, captain to, colonel, let's say. Or, transition from military into something more like, there's a person there. They ask him, have you ever seen this man before? He clearly represents the clandestine intelligence community, who's there in a top secret, hush hush capacity, right? And so you mentioned the cigarette. So what do you think? What does the cigarette symbolize anything, do you think?
I haven't watched the film, so I don't know like will it have a big significance. I just imagine at this time smoking was very common. Like you would just like hand someone a cigarette and y'all would just bond over you would just talk to each other while you're smoking and making yourself more like relaxed around each other.
You said it, bond, right? You don't have to know anything about, I don't think, if you look at this scene, if you understand the rhetoric of the period, the history, have any sense at all of what was going on in the real world, and then you look at this scene and you've seen like the first 10 minutes of the movie, you've seen what kind of guy Willard is. He's introduced to this group of guys, right? Harrison Ford is so uncomfortable with the conversation, he can't even say anything without clearing his throat after every line. He's like, it's almost like he's choking out what he has to say, right? You've got this other military higher up who's very annoyed at the situation. It's beneath him. He has to deal with it, even though he doesn't feel that he should have to, because anybody that's under his command or responsibility should know how the game is played. And then we've got this CIA guy who's lurking in the corner, and he's eating a decadent meal of shrimp and vegetables and things in an environment where a lot of guys are eating out of a can. And, you know, the North Vietnamese are living off the land while they fight this massive US insurgency, you know. And then in comes Willard, and he doesn't know what to make of this weird group of folks, right? And he's just kind of listening. And then they do what anybody would do, right? They're, you know, it's a group of guys standing around and they all want to be on the same page, right? So what do? They offer you a cigarette, you accept, and you take a drag, and that's complicity, I think. So what they did is they tacitly sucked him in and said, are you going to be our boy or not? You know, are you going to go take care of this problem for us that we're trying to sweep under the rug? You know, it could mean a promotion for you. And of course he's like, oh yes, sir. You know, I'm your boy. Takes the cigarette and takes a puff. That's like, you know, sealing the deal kind of thing, right? He's accepting this as, you know, perhaps an opportunity for him to, you know, elevate himself, get out of his own situation of, you know, stagnation. So there's a lot going on. And I think that this moment, it's not only Captain Willard's inciting moment, I think, but it's also a scene with a lot of foreshadowing, right? They're talking about some very important concepts in here, which is, you know, having to do with, you know, Colonel Kurtz, when Colonel Kurtz decided that he doesn't agree with the institutional policy of colonialism, empire, and expansion of hegemony, and decides that war is an immoral act, becomes a problem, because that is a counterintuitive narrative to everything that these guys in this room are selling, right? They're capitalizing on it financially. They're capitalizing on it in terms of their power structure. And they're growing an empire in the process. And he's, you know, they're accusing this guy of becoming, of turning crazy because his ideas no longer match their own policies and ideologies, right? And so what's going to be required ultimately of Captain Willard is he's going to have to cross that Rubicon himself. He's going to have to, he'll be confronted with the possibility of his own insanity in the process, because of the lengths he's going to have to go to meet this guy Kurtz on Kurtz's home territory, right? And so there's a lot going on here. It's a huge, complex, inciting moment, because it's giving us a lot of details, a lot of foreshadowing. It's telling us a lot about who these characters are, what they represent, and it's showing us initially Willard's buy-in, right? So he's going willingly. This is, you know, clearly a call to action, right? And the call is coming from these guys in the room. And the action is get rid of this undesirable. And he accepts the call right off the bat. He accepts the call. What's going to happen is, especially in consideration to all of these underlying themes on the movie, is a series of events that are going to continue to challenge Willard's decision to accept the call. And they're going to continue to reveal to him the depth of the investment it's going to take for him to survive this ordeal. And it manifests itself in a few key scenes. I've got a couple of them here if you want to just take a quick look at what the introduction to Willard is to, you know, his team and the people that are bringing him in country. It's going to be a little bit of his experience while he is coming up the Mekong River. And then there's going to be a brief respite where we're going to be shown the extent of the military decadence in the way that they bring a USO show hundreds of miles up the Mekong River behind lines of conflict to give the soldiers a Playboy USO show. And then the finale. And I have some data to support some of my arguments here at the very end of this. It's only a couple minutes per clip. So let's take a quick look.
Shall we dance? Jack it up. Outstanding, 50. Outstanding. Get your case of beer for that.
Okay, so the scene goes on for a little bit longer, and they totally destroy this village. And then shortly after this scene, it's the famous scene where they're all out on the sandbar, and this new air cavalry commander, played by Robert Duvall, sends the corporal out surfing, and says to the corporal, you know, the waves are as good here as they're going to get in the whole of Vietnam. Look at that surf out there. Do you want to go out and tear it up? And he's like, right now, in the middle of this shootout. And he says, son, you can put a rifle in your hand or you can go surf. What do you want to do? And he sends the kid out, and the kid goes surfing in the middle of this firefight, right? And so there's some interesting accusations being leveled in this particular scene. But is there anything that stands out to you directly about what I just played back for you? And anything at all? Who was it that mentioned that they looked at this film once before for the soundtrack technique?
It was me.
Abby, what do you think? Did you do you have any thoughts about the use of the soundtrack here?
Kind of like it's kind of like the soundtrack's kind of like this like epic, like strong soundtrack, and it kind of reflects how the soldiers are compared to the villagers. They're like these, but it's like the soundtrack's more like, I guess, on, you could say, on a happier side, but this is not a happy occasion. And so they're just kind of like coming in and dominating, killing off everybody. So it's kind of contrast in that way.
Yeah, especially the way we see the choppers emerge out of the sunrise, right?
Mm-hmm.
Low across the water, and he says in the very first line, bring it in low and loud, psyop style, you know, let's do this. And they turn on the music, right? And so we hear, you know, the ride of the Valkyrie, right, which is a famous classical piece of music. And in comes this group of US soldiers. But then when we cut to the village, it goes totally quiet. And we see life from the other point of view briefly before these guys arrive on the scene. And so what I think the filmmaker Coppola is saying at this point is this is how the military sees themselves. They're coming in with their own soundtrack to make right a massive, you know, wrong that has been committed somehow. And yet when we see the village from the other point of view, it's just a quiet, you know, pastoral agrarian setting that gets interrupted by the violence and the intensity of this attack. And so then it becomes, you know, then it becomes the soundtrack of the entire battle at this point. And of course the Vietnamese join in and they reciprocate, and it becomes this, you know, this, you know, hyper realistic conflict. So I think it's, and the guys that are in the chopper are all Captain Willard's team. That he, you know, he was sort of given these guys to assist him and take him, you know, to follow him into the jungle to find Colonel Kurtz. And for them, you know, this is their first, in many cases, their first taste of the real violence of the conflict. They've been back at the military base partying, drinking beers. In fact, one of the things that Duvall says when the side gunner shoots down one of the pieces of artillery, he says, "I owe you a case of beer for that one." Right. And so you can totally see the attitude of the U.S. participation in this conflict and their point of view on what they're doing. And then you see from the other point of view, possibly, the reaction of people who were just out there, teaching kids in school and living on a farm. Right. And for us, the stakes were a case of beer, and for them, it was life and death. So this is, I think, this is a pretty scathing indictment in this particular scene. The next scene I think is pretty quick, but this is Willard's now first taste of, I think, reality of what's going on here.
It was a way we had over here of living with ourselves. We'd cut them in half with a machine gun and give them a Band-Aid. It was a lie. And the more I saw them, the more I hated lies. Those boys were never going to look at me the same way again. But I felt like I knew one or two things about Kurtz that weren't in the dossier. Long Bridge was the last army outpost on the Nung River. Beyond it, there was only Kurtz.
Lance! Hey, Lance! What do you think? It's beautiful. Huh? I mean, what's the matter with you? You acting kind of weird.
Hey, you know that last tub of acid I was saving?
Yeah.
I dropped it.
You dropped acid? Far out.
I was sent here from the Trang with these 3 days ago, sir. Expected you here a little sooner. This is mail for the boat. You don't know how happy this makes me, sir. Why? Now I can get out of here, if I can find a way. You're in the asshole of the world, Captain! Captain, where you going?
See if I can find some fuel, get some information. Take me up the other side of the bridge.
Somebody go with him.
Yeah, I'll go.
I want to go.
Okay, so this is pretty short. Anybody see anything particularly interesting or poignant?
I guess it's just by the reactions of the other soldiers who were in the water and their reaction to that one group in particular. I mean, aren't they all technically like on the same side, or am I missing something?
Yeah, they're all on the same side, all right. And the problem is Willard's going deeper in country, and those guys that jumped into the water were asking for a ride out. They were done. It was more than they could deal with, and they wanted out, right? And what's going on here at this bridge is something surreal and something that, you don't see every day. And for, the average psyche, it might be too much, too overwhelming. That the guy that delivers the mail to the boat, he's delivering mail to the boat. I mean, how strange is that in the middle of this bizarre setting where there's clearly conflict happening right across that bridge on the other side. There are troops running for their lives, begging for a ride home on this gunboat. And he delivers a bag of mail to the boat for the guys, right? And says, "You're in the asshole of the world now, Captain. And I get to get out of here now that I've fulfilled my mission, which was to deliver you guys your bag of mail." The interesting thing about each of these clips, I think, is it's almost like Willard is having an inciting moment over and over and over again. And each time these poignant scenes happen that he bears witness to, he's got an opportunity to change his mind and turn around and haul ass, doesn't he? And he keeps recommitting to the goal, right? Which gets us further along the story structure than inciting moment in some ways, because, you know, the refusal of the call, and then, you know, add additional hardships, and then a possibility of the circle repeating itself with additional conflict or additional inciting moments, can take us, you know, perpetually into multiple parallel tracks of story, right? And it's always the recommitment to the mission kind of concept from the story stages, from Hoag's story stages. And it's the repetitive inciting moment happening over and over again. He gets his team and he gets in a helicopter and he sees this incredible insanity, the way these guys conduct their warfare, and go surfing, you know. And then he gets in a boat and he starts going up river, and, you know, the first thing he sees is this surreal conflict happening, and the priority for this other soldier, and the thing keeping him in that situation and preventing him from retreating without losing honor or losing face or getting demoted, is to deliver a bag of mail, the seemingly mundane thing that he has to do, and yet that's his obligation, his existential obligation. And all those soldiers want to do is get the hell out of there. And he decides, I'm going to move forward again, right? So then they get a little further upriver, and after a few other events and things that happen, which I think are less consequential, he encounters this situation. So they get way upriver, right? And they've had all these strings, these series of, you know, small incidental events that happen. And just when he thinks he's in the absolute middle of the heart of darkness, the middle of nowhere, they come upon these lights in the river, and the boat kind of steams up and pulls off to the side, and they sit there and they witness this thing happening.
Charlie didn't get much USO. He was dug in too deep or moving too fast. His idea of great R&R was cold rice and a little rat meat. He had only two ways home: death or victory.
Okay. This is a pretty famous scene. Because again, it's got, man, there's so many layers of, indictment going on here. What do you think? Is it, can you see, for instance, the resonance of one of the stages of story that we talked about? It happens in the extended Vogler version of the 3-act structure, where the hero questions himself, his friends, and his allies. Wonders, what the hell am I really doing? And it's part of it's prior to the second push, or the final acceptance, the final commitment to the quest. Can you see that sort of reflected in the narrative here? Anyone?
Could you repeat that again, Professor Walsh? My internet kind of lagged out a little bit.
Can you see resonating in this narrative, the hero questioning himself, his friends, or his allies? The stage of story right before recommitment to the quest, or the final push, as illustrated in the Vogler extended 3-act structure, the 12 stages that parallels the hero's journey.
I would say yeah, because like, isn't that like a big part of like his character throughout the film, is like in reference to like Marlon Brando's character, right? Like he questions. It's been a long time since I've seen the movie, so I'm trying to like.
All you need to see are the clips I'm showing you here to give me your feelings about. For instance, I showed you the scene where they recruit him in the first place, and what do they tell him? What do those three spooks in the mobile home tell Captain Willard? They tell him his job is to assassinate Colonel Kurtz, but what do they do to get him on board with that idea? What do they do to get him on board with the assignment?
Wasn't that when they were playing the recordings for him, and they were like,
and in
doing
doing
like he had gotten like insane?
Yes, yeah. This guy's nuts. You got to stop it. He needs to be stopped. He's given war a bad name, right? And then now we have this contrasting scene where he's been part of a beach invasion. His men are freaked out by the reality of the conflict because they've never been this deep in country. Then they have that situation at the bridge where his own allied troops have gone insane. They've become berserkers. They want to get the hell out of there, and they almost take over his boat just to get downriver and out of harm's way. And then when he gets as deep as he thought he ever thought he was into the Mekong Delta, all of a sudden there's a USO show with the Playboy Playmates that have been flown in by helicopter. There's a band. There's hundreds of park hands on truss towers. There's decorations. There's bleachers. There's a stage. All this stuff in the middle of nowhere. And you can see that the soldiers automatically revert back to, the bread and circuses mentality of back home. They're at the football game. They're at the homecoming game, right? And they've suspended their painful reality of the war for a few minutes, and they're now at a game show, right? And it's in the middle of Vietnam, and there's a fence around the perimeter, and outside the perimeter, the locals are looking at this like they can't believe what they're looking at. And I think Willard is feeling the same angst. He hops down out of the bleachers and he looks up at his guys engaging in the mayhem, and he looks at what he's seeing in his front of his eyes, and I think for the first time he starts wondering, who was it that was crazy again? Was it Kurtz or is it us? Because who other than a crazy person would do this in the middle of a war zone? What what's the difference now? We're starting to see him compare the contrast between somebody they said was crazy and the sheer craziness of the situation. And I think this is where we start seeing a mental turn in this guy. And again, he accepts it, right? And it draws him in further. Instead of him going, that's it, I've seen enough. I'm gone. I'm out of here. You can take your promotion and shove it, right? I'm gone. He doesn't. He doubles, triples, quadruples down at this point, and he decides he's going to see it through all the way. And I don't know if it's because he's just got to know now, or he needs to confront what he's been told is evil to find out if that's really what it is, or if he isn't the evil himself looking in on itself, kind of like the final scene in Falling Down, where Michael Douglas asks again Robert Duvall, who plays the cop who corners him at the Santa Monica Pier, and Michael Douglas, after going through a string of situations and stuff and violent interactions and conflict, he says, when did I become the criminal? All I wanted was breakfast at 10:32 in the morning. And so it becomes the hero questioning again the situation. Who was it that was the bad guy again? So I think we're being asked, the filmmaker is making us ask all these questions of ourselves by showing us how his protagonist is going through these situations, and each time he chooses to continue on and accept the call to action and not reject it. So the final scene, I'll skip over that because I want to cut this short. But in the final scene, Captain Willett has to confront himself. He meets the colonel. He sees the situation the colonel is existing under, and what's going on. He discovers that yes, in fact, the colonel is crazy, but maybe not for the reasons that he was told. That perhaps the burden of the knowledge of wrongdoing is what drove the colonel to his crazy, and the accepting and the bearing of responsibility for his actions has driven him crazy, and the fact that he has discovered that his service to an unrealistic master has driven him crazy, and all of the reasons why he's crazy are none of the reasons that he was told. And in order to put an end to this guy, Captain Willard has to accept the dark side in himself and become the very thing that he was protecting against. He has to, in essence, murder this guy. And it's a very powerful scene. And for those of you who haven't seen the movie, if it's possible for you to suspend your notions of, a traditional war movie and look for deeper themes that resonate with these characters, I think it becomes an interesting analysis of a lot of ideas that resonate in some of the modern film culture today. And I know certainly in our actual culture, the reality of our culture, I can remember every night on the evening news at the end of the broadcast, Walter Cronkite would tell us how many young men and women were killed in Vietnam that day, every day, 5 days a week during prime time. And they would show at the air base in Germany. There's an air base in Germany, and there's another one in I think it's in Indonesia, where they would put the flag draped caskets in coffins on the C-130s and fly them back to the United States for processing. And that stuff would be shown on the news every night of the week at prime time at the end of the news broadcast. And that was part of what was generating the anti-war sentiment among the public. And it's for that reason, to this day, the CNN guys who covered Desert Storm, for instance, they weren't allowed to leave the compound in the green zone, the roof of the hotel. And so a lot of the reporting of the Iraqi war was long lens shots of lights off in the distance and a war happening somewhere beyond the edge of the hotel perimeter lighting. And they were on the roof of the hotel speculating about the horrors that were happening in the dark in Iraq in the desert at night. Instead of being embedded with the things that were really going on and showing the conflict actually happening. Why? Because that's not popular with the public. If you show the public the reality of war, they won't have it. They won't put up with it for 1 minute. So we have to be sort of spoon-fed these ideological and manipulated clips that will allow us to form opinions without really seeing the reality of what we're dealing with. And I think that that is strongly reflected in Apocalypse Now, and it's strongly reflected in our own culture of current events. So it helps to understand some of these things in context and think about them. And you know, so this could have been a straight up war movie. You know, Martin Sheen, you know, gets in the boat and has a series of gunfights driving up the Mekong River until he meets the evil colonel, and the evil colonel turns out to be as inexplicably evil as he was described, and they have an ultimate conflict, one against the other, who will prevail. And you know, by some stroke of luck, Willard wins the battle, crawls back to the boat, and returns to safety. But instead, he made it more of a moral journey. He made it more of an odyssey for Captain Willard, in an effort to have a real conversation with the audience, using Captain Willard as a proxy, and talking to us about, you know, a loftier concept than simply a war movie. And I think for that reason, I think that's why this movie is looked on as, you know, one of the greatest war movies of all time. Not because it's any particularly good depiction of, you know, the mere violent acts of warfare, but because it has all of these debates really sewn within the narrative. And it's really the filmmaker offering the audience these arguments and saying, what do you think? You know, and it starts with one good hero being motivated in some way. And in this case, in this film, that work was done for us in the form of current events. And then Captain Willard becomes our proxy as we become engaged in and immersed in this world. And we have to sort ourselves out in the process. What do you think about this? What do you think about this? What do you think about this? So, just in conclusion here, we can say, as a result of this approach to storytelling, that Apocalypse Now, in the year that it was released, which was 79, Palme d'Or, the winner of the Cannes Film Festival. It won the 52nd Academy Award for Best Cinematography, and that was Vittorio Storaro. 52nd Academy Award for Best Sound. So there you go, Abby. The sound won the Academy Award. Also 6 additional nominations: Best Film, Best Screenplay, Best Director, and a couple of others. Across the pond at the British Academy Awards, it won Best Director, Best Supporting Actor, and had 7 additional nominations. The following award season, it won the Golden Globes for Best Director, Best Supporting Actor, Best Musical Score, and 1 additional nomination. And it also won the National Film Critics Award in 1979 for Best Supporting Actor. So that's Martin Sheen. 22nd Grammy Award, Best Original Score, and the 32nd Writers Guild of America Best Screenplay nomination. So that's some pretty heavy credentials, right? And that's the industry acknowledging that it was more than just a war story. It had a lot more going on than that. So I know that, you know, your writing career is in its early stages at this point. But I'm asking or suggesting to you that you might consider, you know, making your stories more poignant than simply the lowest hanging fruit, which would be a merely the execution of a plot, and try to incorporate some of this sort of audience author interaction in the form of commentary, social commentary, political commentary, whatever, and use your characters as proxies for opinions or points of view that can stimulate, debate and discussion for other filmmakers, because the more they talk about your work, right? I think who was it that said there's no such thing as bad publicity? The more they talk about your work and the more that your work is in the public sphere, I think maybe the more regarded it can be. Instead of being average, you set yourself apart as being, a filmmaker with a loftier mission, perhaps, than just a simple storyteller. So that's it, really. Does anybody have any reaction to that? I mean, I'm expressing an opinion now. I'm not saying that this is what must happen, but I'm trying to show you, in contrast to just a basic movie, what lurks beneath the surface. Any thoughts on that at all? Any opinions? Anything to add? I'm sure there's plenty that I've missed here. No? All right. Well, if there are no follow-up questions, I got one in the chat. What's this? Oh, thank you. Yes, thank you. Then I will adjourn the meeting for this afternoon. Thanks for your time and attention. I appreciate it. Remember your homework assignment. And if you've got anything to share on Thursday, I welcome it. I'd love to have another terrific workshop like we did last week. That really I think it went well. So think about that, and I'll see you guys on Thursday afternoon.
Thank you, Professor.
Thank you. Have a good afternoon.